I manage a cozy cabin nestled in a quiet, forested area just outside the city, listed on Airbnb. It's the kind of place where people come to escape their daily lives, surrounded by nothing but towering trees and the gentle sounds of nature. The stillness of the place makes you feel like time has slowed down, like the worries of the outside world are miles away. It's been good business, better than I could have hoped. Families, couples, and solo travelers all rave about the peace and serenity. They leave glowing reviews about the way the trees seem to embrace the cabin, offering a cocoon of tranquility, and how the fresh air revitalizes the soul. Each guest brings their own energy to the cabin, but most are respectful. They enjoy their time, clean up after themselves, and leave without any issues. In return, I check in with them once or twice during their stay, a simple courtesy call or message to make sure everything's fine. And it always is. This time, the guest was a woman named Alice. She booked the cabin for a few days through Airbnb. From her profile, she seemed like the typical guest, quiet, polite, and eager to spend time alone. When we spoke over the phone, she sounded cheerful but not overly chatty. I remember thinking that she was probably looking for solitude, just like so many others who escaped my little slice of peace in the woods. The first night passed without any issues. I sent Alice a quick message the next morning, asking if everything was okay. She replied with a simple yes, everything's great. Thank you. Her voice was calm, maybe a bit distracted, but nothing unusual. I thought nothing of it. After all, some people come here to recharge, to disconnect. I figured she was just enjoying her break from the chaos of everyday life. The days passed uneventfully, at least as far as I knew. I assumed Alice was spending her time relaxing, maybe reading or taking walks around the forested paths. Some guests venture out into the woods, but most prefer to stay close to the cabin, soaking up the atmosphere. When the time came for her to check out, I waited for the usual message, the thanks for a lovely stay or the quick 5-star review on Airbnb. But nothing came. No message, no review, no acknowledgement that she had even left. That was strange, but not entirely out of the ordinary. People get busy. They rush off to their next destination, and sometimes they forget to leave a note. Still, I couldn't shake the odd feeling in my gut as I drove up to the cabin to clean. The drive through the forest was as peaceful as ever, but there was an unsettling chill in the air, and the shadows between the trees seemed darker than usual. When I arrived, the cabin looked the same from the outside, quaint and quiet, nestled comfortably among the pines, but something felt off. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching beneath my feet. As I approached the door, that uneasy feeling grew stronger. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the cabin felt different, like it was holding its breath. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, expecting to find the usual, a couple of dishes left out, maybe a trash bag that needed taking out. But the moment I crossed the threshold, I knew something was very wrong. The smell hit me first. It was overpowering, musty, damp, like rotting wood mixed with something else. Smoke? It wasn't the pleasant smell of a fireplace or a campfire. No, this was stale, almost acrid. I wrinkled my nose and took a few steps deeper into the cabin, the floor creaking ominously beneath me. As I moved through the cabin, my heart began to race. Every room was in disarray. Chairs were overturned, books were scattered across the floor, and the bedding had been torn from the mattress. It looked like a struggle had taken place, something violent. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. That's when I heard it. Breathing. At first, I thought it was the sound of the wind through the trees, or maybe the hum of the old refrigerator. But no, it was breathing. Slow, labored, and unmistakably human. It was faint, almost drowned out by the low buzz I had noticed earlier, but there it was again. The sound was coming from the bedroom closet. I could feel my pulse in my throat as I slowly made my way toward the door. Every step felt heavier than the last, the dread building with each inch closer to that closet. My hand trembled as I reached out and grasped the handle, the cold metal sending a shiver up my spine. With a deep breath, I pulled it open. The sight before me made my blood run cold. There, crumpled on the floor of the closet, was a woman. She was barely alive, her face pale and gaunt, her skin covered in dark bruises. Her lips were cracked and dry, her breathing shallow, each gasp a struggle for air. Blood matted her hair, and her clothes were torn and dirty. She looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes, but no words came. I stumbled backward, my mind racing to process what I was seeing. My hands fumbled for my phone, shaking uncontrollably as I dialed emergency services. The conversation with the operator is a blur now. I must have sounded hysterical, my words jumbled and panicked, but somehow I managed to explain what I had found. The paramedics arrived quickly, their faces grim as they assessed the woman's condition. They worked swiftly, loading her onto a stretcher and rushing her to the hospital. I stood in the doorway, watching in disbelief as the ambulance disappeared down the dirt road, its sirens cutting through the stillness of the forest. Once the paramedics were gone, I called the police. They arrived shortly after, asking all the usual questions. Had I seen anyone else? Had I noticed anything strange during Alice's stay? At first, I didn't know what to tell them. Nothing had seemed out of the ordinary until now. But then they asked about Alice. That's when it clicked. Alice had mentioned something in passing during our initial conversation. She had said she was a blogger, with a small but dedicated following. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, it seemed harmless enough. But as the police pressed for details, I remembered. She had posted about her stay, shared a picture of the cabin, talked about how peaceful it was. And that's when the police confirmed my worst fears. Alice hadn't been alone. One of her followers, a man, had tracked her down. He wasn't just a fan, he was obsessed. He had been following her for months, watching her every move online. When she unknowingly revealed her location, he saw it as his chance. He had driven up to the cabin in the dead of night, broken in, and attacked her. She had tried to hide in the closet, barricading herself inside, but it hadn't been enough. He found her, beat her, and left her for dead. For some reason, he hadn't killed her. Maybe he thought she wouldn't survive. Maybe he thought no one would find her. But I did. I'll never forget the look in her eyes when I opened that closet door. The fear, the desperation. And now, every time I step foot in that cabin, I hear it again. That low, constant hum, like the place is whispering to me, trying to remind me of what happened. I know it's not real, it's just my mind playing tricks on me. But it lingers like a stain that won't wash away. The cabin used to be a place of peace, a sanctuary. Now it feels different, darker, colder. The trees that once felt comforting now seem oppressive, their shadows creeping in through the windows, suffocating the light. I've had new guests since then, but every time I return to clean, I can still hear it. The breathing, faint, ragged, coming from the closet. And no matter how hard I try, I can't shake the feeling that someone is still watching, waiting. It all started when I booked an Airbnb for a work trip. I needed something quiet and comfortable, nothing fancy, just a place to sleep and get some work done. The listing was a typical suburban house, located in a peaceful neighborhood just outside the city. The house looked exactly like the photo's white picket fence, a neatly trimmed lawn, and a brick exterior that gave off a warm, inviting vibe. I let myself in with the code the host had sent me, and everything inside seemed perfectly fine. The first night was uneventful. I spent most of it catching up on emails and going over reports for an upcoming meeting. Around midnight, I decided to head to bed. I remember locking the front door and checking the windows. Everything was secure. But as I lay in bed, something odd started to nag at me, an unsettling feeling like I wasn't really alone. I chalked it up to paranoia from being in an unfamiliar place. It wasn't uncommon for me to feel uneasy in new environments, and I forced myself to ignore it. At around 2 a.m., I woke up to a strange noise. It wasn't loud, more like the faint sound of something sliding across the floor. I sat up in bed, straining my ears. The noise stopped. After a few minutes of sitting in the dark, I convinced myself it must have been the house settling or something outside. I pulled the covers up and went back to sleep. Then came the second night. By this point, I had trouble sleeping. Every little sound jolted me awake. But what I heard that night wasn't just a creak or a thud. It was a whisper so faint I almost thought I imagined it. But then it came again, closer this time. It was coming from the hallway outside my bedroom. My heart started racing. I got out of bed as quietly as I could and crept toward the door. When I opened it, the hallway was empty, dark, and silent. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, listening. Nothing. Just as I turned to go back into the bedroom, I heard it again, a soft, raspy voice, barely more than a breath, come downstairs. I froze. The voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. Someone was in the house. My immediate thought was that someone had broken in. I rushed to my phone, ready to call the police, but as I picked it up, I saw that the battery was dead. I hadn't even noticed it dying earlier. My charger was downstairs in the living room. There was no way I was going down there. Not after hearing that. Instead, I grabbed the small chair from the corner of the room and wedged it under the doorknob. My heart was pounding, and every shadow seemed to shift unnaturally in the dark. I barely slept, just sat there in the corner of the room, waiting for morning. At first light, I packed my things and left. I didn't even bother cleaning up or leaving a message for the host. I just wanted to get out of that house. As I was loading my bags into the car, I noticed something that sent a chill through me. On the front porch, next to the welcome mat, was a small piece of paper folded neatly in half. I picked it up, and my blood ran cold when I saw the words scrawled in jagged handwriting, "Why didn't you come downstairs?" I threw the paper away and got into my car. As I drove away, my mind raced with questions. Who or what had been in that house with me? And why had I been the only one to hear it? I never contacted the host, and I never reported anything to Airbnb. I just wanted to forget the whole experience. But even now, weeks later, I can't shake the feeling that someone is still watching me. Our vacation to California was supposed to be perfect. Emily and I had been working nonstop for the past year, saving up for this trip, looking forward to some time away from the routine of work and daily life. California was calling, with its beaches, its national parks, and its vibrant cities. We had booked a quaint little Airbnb near the coast, a small, cozy house in a quiet neighborhood. Everything was set, or so we thought. When we arrived at the airport, the weather was as beautiful as expected. The kind of weather we had dreamed of for months, warm, sunny, with a gentle breeze that kissed your skin. The trip had already begun to live up to the brochures and travel guides. As we left the airport, I hailed a taxi. I can still picture the driver, an unremarkable man in his mid-40s, balding with a thin mustache and a tired expression on his face. He greeted us with the usual pleasantries, asking if we were visiting or locals. Tourists, I responded, tossing our bags into the trunk. Emily was excited, pointing out all the landmarks along the way, already lost in the adventure. The driver asked us where we were staying, and I told him about the Airbnb we had booked. I didn't think much of it. It was a casual question, the kind anyone might ask, but something in the way he looked at me through the rearview mirror made me uneasy. He smiled when I mentioned the neighborhood, but it was a strange smile, forced and cold, as if his face was used to making expressions his heart didn't feel. It lasted only a second, but it was enough to make me shift uncomfortably in my seat. The ride to the house wasn't long, maybe 20 minutes. We passed through bustling streets, quiet neighborhoods, and finally, a secluded part of town. The Airbnb was exactly like the photos: small, charming, and tucked away in a peaceful little corner. The surrounding area was quiet, with only a few other houses nearby. It seemed perfect. The driver helped us unload our luggage, but as we paid him, I noticed again how his eyes lingered on us, or more specifically, on the house. His smile appeared once more, but this time it didn't disappear when he turned to leave. Instead, he gave us a small nod, got back into his car, and drove away slowly, his taillights vanishing down the road. I brushed it off. Maybe I was overthinking things. Emily and I were exhausted from the flight, so after unpacking our bags, we decided to go explore the nearby area. There was a small beach a few miles away, and we figured it would be nice to relax, maybe grab dinner at one of the local restaurants before heading back for the night. It was a beautiful day, and as the sun began to set, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, we felt our excitement growing. We were finally on vacation, and nothing could ruin it. After a quick dinner, we returned to the Airbnb, looking forward to a quiet night in. The house was small but cozy, the kind of place that felt warm and inviting despite being unfamiliar. I noticed there were no streetlights near the house, which gave the area an eerie, almost isolated feeling once the sun had fully set. It was pitch black outside, save for the dim glow from the porch light. We showered and got ready for bed, eager to start our first full day in California the next morning. Emily drifted off to sleep almost immediately, her soft breathing filling the room. I, on the other hand, found it harder to relax. That feeling of unease from earlier still lingered in the back of my mind, gnawing at me. It was nothing specific, just a vague sense that something was off. The house was too quiet. It felt like the walls were listening. I closed my eyes, telling myself that I was just being paranoid. It had been a long day, and I was overtired, but sleep didn't come easily. I tossed and turned, my thoughts restless, until finally, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a shallow sleep. Sometime later, I awoke to a sound that made my blood run cold. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then I heard it again: footsteps. Soft, deliberate footsteps, moving slowly down the hallway. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest, straining to listen. It was faint, but unmistakable. Someone was in the house. I glanced over at Emily, who was still sound asleep beside me. I didn't want to wake her, not yet. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was the house settling or the wind outside. But then I heard it again. The creak of the floorboards just outside the bedroom door. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't the wind. This wasn't the house. Someone was walking toward our room. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could, careful not to wake Emily. My hands trembled as I reached for the door, pressing my ear against it. The footsteps had stopped, but I could hear movement. Someone was in the living room, moving around slowly, as if searching for something. For a moment, I stood there, paralyzed by fear. What if they were armed? What if they were dangerous? I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing, but I couldn't think straight. I reached for my phone, my hands shaking, and texted Emily to stay quiet and not make a sound. She woke up almost immediately, wide-eyed with fear when she read my message. We didn't dare make a noise. We stayed there, frozen, listening to the stranger rummage through our belongings. I could hear drawers opening, the faint rustle of papers, the soft clink of something being picked up. My stomach churned with dread. What were they after, and why had they chosen our house? Emily grabbed her phone and started dialing 911, but I stopped her. I didn't want the intruder to hear us. Instead, I motioned toward the window. The room was on the ground floor, and the window led to the backyard. If we could get out quietly, we might be able to escape without them knowing. We tiptoed across the room, careful to avoid any creaky floorboards, and slowly opened the window. My heart was racing so fast I could barely think. The night air was cool against my skin as we climbed out into the darkness. Once outside, we bolted toward the nearest neighbor's house, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. The neighbors were an elderly couple, and they answered the door immediately when we pounded on it, letting us inside without hesitation. We explained what had happened, and they called the police for us. The wait felt like an eternity. Every second that passed, I feared that the intruder would realize we were gone and come after us. When the police finally arrived, they stormed the house, but the intruder was already gone. He had stolen most of our belongings, our phones, laptops, money, and even our passports. It was a complete violation, not just of our privacy, but of our sense of security. The police took our statements, and we told them everything, including the strange behavior of the taxi driver. That's when the real horror set in. The police told us that the man who had broken in wasn't just a random thief. He had been working with the taxi driver. Apparently, this had happened to other tourists in the area. The driver would pick them up from the airport, ask where they were staying, and then tip off his accomplice, who would break into their accommodations while they were out or asleep. We had walked right into their trap without even realizing it. Our belongings were never fully recovered, but we were lucky to have escaped without harm. Still, the damage was done. The rest of our vacation was overshadowed by fear. Every night, even in the safety of a hotel, I found myself lying awake, listening for footsteps in the dark, wondering if we were truly safe or if someone else was watching us, waiting for their chance to strike again. That feeling of violation, of being hunted, stayed with me long after we returned home. It turned what should have been a dream vacation into a nightmare I'll never forget. And even now, as I sit here telling this story, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if we hadn't woken up in time.